Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show today. Welcome to your Monday edition. It is the first day of a recruiting dead period, and boy, did Oregon have some fireworks all in the days leading up to this recruiting dead period, because maybe the biggest recruiting weekend we can remember from a pure official visit standpoint happened. The names grew and grew. Oregon had 4 5-star players on campus. And most importantly, for an unofficial visit, was 5-star quarterback Devonte Moore out of Martin Luther King High School in Detroit, Michigan. This was his second visit to Eugene. And guys, I think a month ago, it felt like Oregon was in the picture, but it's like some things had to go their way for Oregon to get him. And over that month, things have fallen correctly for Oregon. And then it got real serious this weekend when Moore arrived. Obviously, Steve Wiltfong, director of recruiting at 24/7 Sports, has placed a crystal ball for Oregon to land Devonte Moore. But there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of excitement around a potential addition to Devonte Moore of Devonte Moore to this class, which the ripple effect of it could be huge for the long-term prospectus of this recruiting class for 2023.
We've talked about it before. Recruiting classes are built around the quarterback, and for Oregon to potentially land the lone 5-star, I know Ty Thompson was a 5-star by some services, but the lone consensus 5-star, and Devonte Moore would be absolutely massive. And I think it's very notable he made it up here on his own dime on an unofficial when Oregon had a bunch of their top targets here. Not that he was recruiting for Oregon, but it certainly doesn't feel like a situation where he just kind of happened to show up at a random weekend and see what was going on. Like, it was very, I think, in the staff was intentional with the choice to have him, potentially come up. And I think he was intentional with his time. The crystal ball is notable. It's also notable that the other big time quarterback prospect that we talked about, or at least I was on vacation for a week, so I can't remember the timeline of all this stuff, but Avery Johnson was the other 4-star quarterback out of Kansas that Oregon was supposedly kind of in on, and maybe a backup plan to Moore. Well, the crystal ball has now shifted to Kansas State, the in-state school for Avery. And I think that's also an indication that, not that Oregon has said, hey, Avery, we're not interested, but we're focused on another player, and it's Devonte Moore. And he was on campus with a bunch of big-time prospects, as Matt says, and you get excited by the possibility of this. And the fact that Wiltfong has put a crystal ball in adds to it. I know Matt has heard some really positive things as well about how this visit went down. And there's a photo posed of him posing with Marcus Mariota, who was up here for, I think, a golf tournament this weekend. So, I mean, a lot of things kind of fell in line. There's a lot of excitement around this football program and this recruiting class. And again, Oregon already has a couple of top 150 wide receivers committed, already has a 4-star running back, but they're in on some of the other top receivers and running backs nationally, a couple of which have been on campus recently. And I just think you have to be really encouraged by where the offensive recruiting is going this cycle, because you go into it, I think we all kind of expect, hey, they're going to get some dudes on defense with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy and their history. Not that we thought, hey, they wouldn't land anybody on offense, but I think there was a sense of defense is going to be the easier place to start based upon kind of prior success at other schools. There's a chance that Oregon has a really, really loaded class, and that several of their top 5 to 6 guys are offensive players. And that's a great place to start for a program that really needs kind of a bit of an offensive influx of talent. Not that they don't have guys right now, but certainly you'd love to start with a guy like Moore, who could in theory come in 23 and maybe challenge to play as a true freshman. And if not right away, you've got a couple more years down the line.
You guys both mentioned the ripple effect of what a quarterback can do for a class. And Erik, you mentioned Ty Thompson. You saw that in the 2021 recruiting class. But a more recent guy is just Arch Manning. And I know he wasn't looking at Oregon or anything like that, but just trying to describe what the ripple effect is. He commits to Texas this past week. If you go through the 24/7 Sports, the crystal ball, the prediction page, although there's a lot of them right now after all these recent visits to all the schools in the country, Texas is up there. They've gotten a lot of crystal balls for a lot of wide receivers, even defensive players, just because it shows a significant meaning to other prospects who are considering what school this quarterback goes to. Like, okay, that guy's going there. There's got to be something going on. And when when Wiltfong, when he gave his crystal ball prediction for Devonte Moore to Oregon, I wouldn't say you can write it in concrete or set it in stone, but I think Wiltfong is pretty locked in, obviously, and his crystal balls mean a lot. And you look at, like Erik mentioned, how he gets to Oregon on this past weekend, where all these other tremendous recruits and one of the best recruiting weekends in Oregon history are there. That's on his own dime too. That's something not to take lightly. I think that means a lot. He's obviously a tremendous talent, number 4 quarterback overall in the country. And with you go through the top 10 quarterbacks of the class of 2023, I think he's the only one that's still uncommitted. You had Jaden Rashada recently commit to Miami, I think yesterday. So the time frame for a quarterback of his caliber is to commit sometime in the near future, whether that's the next month, next 2 months, or who knows, in the next couple of weeks. I think it's really important that Oregon is potentially his last visit, and was there with a whole bunch of other really talented guys who, on offense or defense, would definitely feel some sort of recruiting momentum if he picks Oregon.
Yeah, it feels like this could be that crack in the dam if Devonte Moore does commit to Oregon, where the floodgates kind of open up, and then we get into kind of some kooky talk. We were having an off podcast discussion over the weekend of just how realistic some things could be with, this kind of transitions into just this weekend in general of players that there's a lot of excitement for. But Oregon over the weekend last couple of weekends had 5-star Mateo Ngalele on campus, 5-star Richard Young on campus, Jaden Wayne, who is a top 40 player in the country. Devonte Moore was here on an official visit. Samuel Mpemba, another 5-star, just showed up on Saturday for an unofficial visit. Last week, David Hicks is a 5-star. He was on campus. Jonte Cook, another 5-star. He was on campus. And you kind of look at these names and you're like, a lot of these guys, I feel like Oregon is either 1A or 1B, or kind of in that unofficial top 3 pecking order. And you start looking at it and going, they realistically could sign 2 or 3 or maybe even 4, as crazy as it sounds, 5-stars. And like you guys just mentioned, Devonte Moore, if he commits in the next couple of weeks and it's for Oregon, it could push a guy like Richard Young, who was at the hip with him in Eugene this past weekend, to go Oregon. And that's where this class could go from a really good class to just blowing away all-time recruiting class. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss some names that we are hearing that could give a verbal commitment to Oregon that were here this past weekend and what it would mean for the Oregon Ducks. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. We're talking heavy recruiting because it was a heavy recruiting weekend. And I don't want to sound like everybody is potential commit that was here this weekend, but I think Oregon's in a good position for basically everybody that was here. So I'll go next step of guys I feel really confident are going to be an Oregon Duck. They had more than a couple offensive linemen on campus, Alani Noah and Micah Benuelos, and I think they're going to get both. Alani Noah was a player that they tried to get to commit in the spring. He decided he wanted to wait. Oregon kind of looked at their other options, and USC felt like they were going to get him last weekend for a verbal commitment, and then he came up here to Eugene for a visit. And I think this visit's going to kind of be the thing that ices it for Oregon. And then Benuelos is an offensive lineman from Washington. Same thing. USC thought they had him. I think Oregon's going to push here and get him. That's going to be a pretty substantial addition. I will not go into too much detail. We don't have to go into too much detail because we just talked about him. I think they're going to get Devonte Moore. I'm going to put a crystal ball in after this podcast, and I think he'll be in the mix. And then you look at the rest of the group that was here for official visits, and I think they're in a good spot for Jaden Wayne. And I almost think that between Blake Purchase and Blake Nicholson and Mikael Gardner, they're going to sign one of those three guys. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but it's one of those three. And so I kind of said it like they're in a really good spot. Like I don't want to go Richard Young. I don't want to go Mateo Ungale because while I feel like they're there, Oregon's is a good spot. I'm just not ready yet to say they're going to sign like five stars. That just seems kind of ridiculous right now. I don't want to go. I'm trying to be conservative here.
Matt's just straining himself a little bit, and I kind of understand why too, because you're coming off this weekend and all of the buzz is so positive that you just kind of go like, is it really going to happen? I know there's a couple on the message board who will listen to this podcast and will comment, yes, I've been saying this is going to happen for a while. And I think this conversation made me think of two podcast discussions we've had. One, which was back in probably May maybe or April, when we talked about like, could Oregon land 4 or 5 stars? And we all kind of shrugged it off like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. And now I'm kind of like, maybe like, is that like, it kind of feels like that's not the most absurd. I'm not going to, again, like Matt, I'm not going to like jump out and say that's going to happen, but like, seems like it's not the most implausible outcome for this. And then the other one is when Matt did his projection on the class, that was kind of like a best case, but not the total best case, but realistic. I think you termed it as. Yeah. And you had Avery Johnson, not Devonte Moore. Well, if you slide Devonte Moore in and you kind of think that, hey, maybe the Devonte Moore ripple effect leads another 5-star or two to sign or give a verbal commitment, you do start going. And I think even with that, your projections there, Matt, which were a little conservative even then, it was like 7th in the country, 8th in the country, that range. Like this could be, I don't want to get too kooky with it either, but like this could be a legitimately, again, we're coming off the biggest weekend of the year, so maybe there's a little bit of recency bias, but it feels like, man, if everything breaks at best case, like this could be that top 3 to 5 to 6 class, which again, I don't want to like write my name and sign it to that and tell all the fans listening that that's what's going to happen. But the buzz is really palpable and it's really real. I'm coming off vacation and I'm kind of reintegrating myself with the message board and what everybody's been reporting and social media, kind of going like, wow, like what a weekend for Oregon. And as Matt said, you don't want to predict everybody's going to commit, but it doesn't feel like Oregon is in bad shape for a lot of these guys. I mean, Richard Young is a player that Wiltfong has also reported Oregon is in good shape with. David Hicks, who visited like last weekend, the weekend prior, the guy Wiltfong also said Oregon is kind of making a push for. And like, you know, we don't know exactly. I haven't heard a whole lot about how Mateo's visit went, but you check his social media. I think he made his like first social media post in over half a year was on his visit to Oregon. And you just kind of think about how all this could play out. And it's hard not to be really optimistic that not only is Dan Lanning and staff going to land a really good class, but this could be like maybe a historically good class. I mean, his first signing class at Oregon could be the best ever. And I think we've all been kind of guarding ourselves to say those kind of things, but the further you get into June and into July, and we'll see kind of how the rest of this plays out over the next couple of weeks, I think there's reason to be really optimistic about how this 23 class is going to shape up.
Yeah, there's reason to be optimistic. I think everybody on the message board, you know, almost exploded when Steve Wiltfong placed a crystal ball for Devonte Moore. And I think there's no reason not to be optimistic. You see a crystal ball prediction like that, you see what Steve Wiltfong and what Matt has heard over the last couple of days, or the last week, I should say. And it's a lot of good things. I think a top 10 class should be very, very much a realistic projection, at least at this point. Like Erik, like you were mentioning with Matt's kind of conservative but realistic projection of a class, that's still a top 10 there. And then you swap out Moore for Johnson. That's pretty darn good. With Mateo Ungale, like that's going to be a close one. Obviously, there's still plenty of teams out there in the country who, I don't know, are kind of like a sleeping beast. Like Alabama doesn't have too many commits, but you know, like 3 of them are 5 stars, so they're going to get into play once again. Richard Young specifically, that's what Steve Wiltfong has said in the past, that Oregon and Alabama are seemingly his 1 and 2 in whatever order they choose. I think signing multiple 5-stars is just going to be really hard to do. Like the 3 to 4 to 5. I don't think a lot of classes do that in general. With Oregon, they still have to go head to head with those guys, and eventually I think they can get the best of them. Maybe this is that class, especially with Oregon's ability to adapt with how recruiting is changing with NIL deals. I just think it's going to be really hard. I don't want to sound like a negative Nelly over here, because I still think that Oregon's going to have a really good position to land in the top 10. But like, yeah, the 4 to 5, the 3, 4, 5, 5-stars is going to be just so difficult to do. But that being said, there's a bunch of really highly talented 4-stars that were on campus that can make up this class. They might not have the same like selling name that a Devonte Moore does, or Uyunglele, or Richard Young, but they're going to boost this class. They're going to have a lot of depth on this team. There's going to be a lot of talent that could turn into potential starters, potential NFL draft picks down the road. And that's not a bad thing. That's what Mario Cristobal has done in the last couple of years. There's usually been a headliner, a 5-star, or a really high 4-star that headlines the class, but the depth that you go through on duckterritory.com, I've been going through every room on the roster, and the last couple of recruiting classes from 19 to 21, those have all been really deep in classes, and those are some of the best players at every position. And I think if Lanning continues to do that, that's great for Oregon. He's going to get his big fish, certainly. I don't know how many big fishes he's going to catch. I know he is a fisherman. But someone like Jurion Dickey, who is still a 4-star right now, but could go up at the end of the year. That's a really good 4-star recruit if that's who you're getting. That's someone like Troy Franklin. That's someone like a Dante Thornton. While it doesn't exactly, the 5-stars always catch everybody's eyes, it's not the worst case when you stack your team up with 13 top 100 guys.
And Jared, Dickey could elevate himself into that 5-star status.
Right.
Which could give you 2. I mean, I'm with Jared, and this is where I was trying to be conservative of like the frequency of Oregon signing multiple 5-stars in the same class is extremely rare. And we've gotten kind of maybe used to it or expecting of it the last couple of seasons because they've done it under Mario Cristobal. And I don't think it had really happened prior to that moment in time.
No.
And so like you're saying something that happened in, a couple times over a 4-year run is going to be what is now the norm when you ignore the fact that for, I think, 25 other years in the recruiting era that they've never done it before. And so I think it's good that Jared's kind of tempering expectations here, because we're still in that infancy stage for Oregon of signing some, that many 5-stars in one class. But I think the point here is that we've made is Oregon is in a position where it could happen. I don't know if we should expect 100%. It. We don't know if we should expect it, but it could happen. We're in a position now where Oregon could be that school that signs 2 to 5 5-star recruits. And Erik brought up the fact of where this class could be from a conservative standpoint. You throw in Dante Moore, Wayne, Purchase, Noah, and Buenelos, and this recruiting class as of today would be the 5th best class in the country. Obviously, those guys all aren't going to commit on the same day. I think it's very safe to also say if they do it in the next month, Oregon will be somewhere in the top 10. And you're flirting with you're in the top 10, you're flirting with your best class in program history at Oregon. So things are trending that direction. And before we wrap up the show, we do need to talk about an actual commitment that has happened. Collin Gill on Friday was Thursday, was one of 2 players this past week to give verbal commitments to the Ducks. Tyler Turner did it first, and then Collin Gill followed it up. A 3-star cornerback from St. John's High School in Washington, D.C. This is a player who's got over 30 scholarship offers. Programs from all the big conferences were after him. These are these are the ones that I think Erik likes the most, and I kind of am too. Where talented dude, he's got the potential in 2 or 3 years to become something pretty special. He just needs time.
Isn't it notable that half of the 8 verbal commitments are defensive backs right now? I think that sort of stands out with what's happened here, and some really good ones. And Gill's a guy who I know is funny seeing some kind of – it became clear earlier, I think last week, that he was probably going to commit, and there was some sense of, is this like a preferred walk-on who's going to have an NIL deal thing? It's like, no, this guy is one of the biggest prospects, like in terms of up-and-comers this summer, and this happens all the time. And I'll be curious to see. I think he's currently like 1100th in the country as a national prospect. That's not where he's going to finish up. And you look at kind of the trajectory he's on, it seems like this is somebody who is probably going to be closer to a high 3-star by the time this is all done. And maybe we can get Brian Doan on here at some point to talk about some of these Northeast kids that Oregon's in on, and maybe he can shed some light on what he sees him projecting at. Or maybe I know we're going to have Steve Wilt. This is kind of a upcoming podcast teaser, but at some point in the next little bit here, Steve's a busy guy, but we're going to have Steve Wiltfong on a podcast. Maybe we can get his insight on Gill as well, just because I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about what they think about him and kind of his emergence as a prospect Oregon would take, because Oregon is in on and has tripped a lot of big time corners and safeties the last couple weeks. And that's one thing I will say is, listed as a corner, you watch him a little bit, like this feels more like a hybrid nickel, maybe a safety guy, somebody who can play several spots. And maybe that's what makes him most attractive, is his potential versatility, where he could be a guy who is capable of playing 2 to 3 spots like a Bennett Williams or, I guess Verone McKinley did that a little bit, but primarily played deep safety. But guys who have that sort of positional versatility in a defensive backfield that wants to give you a bunch of different looks, I think is really valuable. Pretty good size as well, and honestly a little bit more explosive than I think you expect for somebody who didn't have a lot of offers just a couple of months ago. Because you usually, when you see guys explode on like the summer camp circuit, these are guys you look at their the previous high school year tape and you go, nothing really pops. I think you watch them a little bit and you're not coming away going like, oh, that's a stretch. Like it makes sense, and obviously what people have seen this spring and now into the early summer periods. That kind of aligns with, this is a guy that not only did Oregon win, but a lot of schools nationally were kind of pushing their chips in down the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I watched his tape as well. He's certainly someone who seems like a tweener, somebody who can play corner, somebody who can play nickel, somebody who can play safety. I think I would actually prefer him at the safety position. He certainly has man-to-man coverage skills, but when you watch his tape, when he lines up at nickel, wherever he is in the defensive backfield, just not a corner, I just like it better. He runs hard. He runs downhill. He hits hard. He has good routes to the ball handlers. This is a guy whose Final Four was Oregon, Washington, Maryland, and Michigan. This is a kid who, in Brian Doan's article on Duck Territory, he says that he wanted to play in the Pac-12. He wanted to get to the West Coast. Who's someone who is very relieved that he's committed this early and now just waits till December for signing day. I like the pickup for Oregon. This certainly kind of reminds me of how like Darren Barkins really came onto the scene last year, pre-senior season, and kind of shot up the rankings. It was definitely an interesting one when you first heard his name. You looked at his profile, and it's like in the 1100s or whatever the case may be. Like Erik said, I don't think he'll stay there long. He certainly has the intangibles. He has the offer list now after a great summer. I like his size and his strength, his physicality as well. And all those, the size, strength, physicality, those make me feel like he's going to be a safety prospect. In that same article with Doan, he mentions that Oregon is going to try to play him all over the field. That his primary connection was Demetrius Martin, as well as Colin Lockett, who's a defensive analyst, I think he is at Oregon. And so you look at that and how they're stacking this class, like Erik mentioned, with the 4 defensive backs or cornerbacks. Matt and I talked about this on a podcast last week about how Oregon could have potentially 6 safeties leave the program after this year, 2 for sure, in Donovan Dalton and Bennett Williams, who just run out of eligibility. This is another guy who you could place back there and at least get practice reps. And something that Dan Lanning loves to do is get them actual reps, not just in the film room. I think there's a lot of upside with Gill here, and I think it's a good take for Oregon. I think people will be looking at that towards the end of the season and saying, yeah, that was a good idea to take that kid out of DC. I think he'll help out eventually.
I know people are going to look at, he's in the bottom of the recruiting class for Oregon right now, and he's a 3-star. He's the 98th best cornerback in the country. And I know people are going to look at that and just kind of wash it away. Mm-hmm. But these are some of the schools that have offered him scholarships. Cincinnati, which has gone 2 straight years in the regular season without losing a football game, and they've produced more than a handful of NFL players the last 3 or 4 years in the secondary. They have offered Michigan, who was another team to make the college football playoff last season. They have also offered Gill a scholarship. Ole Miss is certainly one that has gotten better the last couple of seasons under Lane Kiffin. They have offered him a scholarship. And then out west, you look at Utah and you look at Washington. And I know, speaking of Washington in this way may make some Duck fans a little upset, but Washington DBs are good. And they produce almost one NFL player every single season for the last 6 years. So if Utah and Washington are also offering a guy, the first instance is, well, Oregon's offering and they like him, there's something there. That should be your first check. If you're still doubting it, look at some of these schools that have offered him scholarships in their history of winning or putting players into the NFL at that particular position. I think that's really an encouraging sign. If you're looking at this thing, oh, it's just a 3-star, who cares?
I think it's also encouraging, before we wrap it here, just that they got a kid from, I know it sounded like he was highly interested in and maybe preferred to go to West, but not very often Oregon lands a kid out of Washington, D.C. In fact, I was trying to look through the all-time commit rankings. There's certainly been kids from Maryland and that part of the country. I don't know if I've seen anybody just from D.C. listed for the entirety of Oregon recruiting since 2002. I need to do a bigger background check on that, but not a place where Oregon has had a ton of success. Again, some success recently with Maryland, so there might be some connections there, but notable anytime you go to a new part of the country or a new, area and have some success and pull a kid, again, who didn't have the biggest offer list a little bit ago, but as Matt ran through and Jared ran through, certainly was coveted by some pretty darn good programs. So I think you got to be encouraged there. And I think you also have to look at the class and go, as Jared said, going to be potentially a lot of outgoing safeties. Yeah. Potentially could be a deal where you lose transfers. You just don't know. I do wonder now, 4 commitments to defensive backs, 2 corners, 2 safeties. Honestly, Gill's kind of a hybrid, so I don't know where you want to put him. I just kind of wonder, what's the cap here from a positional number in terms of how many are takes, because Oregon probably has 16 maybe open spots available. I kind of wonder if you'll see them take 2 to 3 more throughout this class that are defensive backs, whether it be at corner or safety. Because I think with Gill, I don't know if that really changes your number too much with a strictly corner guy. And Oregon's had some pretty darn good corners visit. I just think I think maybe some people look at the numbers and go, oh shoot, well now Oregon only has such a. Are they going to take more corners, and does that ruin them for some of these top prospects? I don't think you look at it that way. I think Oregon will continue to be pretty active in recruiting defensive backs this cycle.
It's going to be interesting seeing this class play out, and the way it's progressing, there's more and more confidence that Oregon is going to have one of the better classes in the Pac-12 and also in the country. And we'll cover it all on duckterritory.com. Stay on the lookout for another podcast that will drop later this week on Wednesday, and then we'll have another one also on Friday. And until then, just know you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.